Welcome to another edition of Cop Talk. Bob.
Yes, sir.
What do you think of the so-called Freedom of Conscience Amendment that failed in a Senate vote this week that would have allowed health care plans and providers to refuse care based on their moral convictions?
It does reflect the polarization in our community. I felt that it should have gone down to defeat, and I think the Republicans have really done themselves a disservice by being so aggressive on this particular issue.
I agree, and when you start to think of the logical extensions of what could happen under such an amendment,
sure,
it could really undercut health care in its entirety. You could have providers who refuse to care for folks who have lung cancer because they disapprove of smoking, or diabetes because they disapprove of people being obese.
Or a Christian Science business owner who feels that no medical material should be covered.
Or a pharmacist who can pick and choose from among drugs. It's an exception that could clearly cause the whole thing to cave in. President Obama has been attacked on his support of religious freedom during this public debate. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think the initial handling was a bit clumsy. I think the president attempted to walk back from the initial position. I have some concerns about whether the president has inherent authority to order private insurance companies to provide this kind of a coverage.
My feeling is, with respect to what the president can and can't do, first of all, a majority of states already have such regulations in place. Second of all, offering medical care to the public, not just to those of your own faith, is a privilege that's accorded pursuant to license that's offered, a franchise, if you will, by the state or by the federal government. And it is not, in my mind, in my opinion, anywhere beyond the lawful authority of a state or the federal government to say, if you want the right, or the privilege rather, of offering health care, you got to provide all the health care available. And if people choose, pursuant to their personal conscience, not to elect to take that health care, I have no problem with that. Speaking of the president, he was very clear in his interview with the Atlantic Monthly that the U.S. is not in any way prepared to accept Iran having nuclear weapons, and that, quote, he doesn't bluff when he's talking about international issues. Do you think taking this stance will help him in advance of his meetings with Bibi Netanyahu this coming week?
I think they will, and I think they will enhance his appearance at the APEC policy conference coming up. I think to take an unequivocal stance with Jeffrey Goldberg, who wrote the initial pieces in the Atlantic about this issue, will certainly help him.
I mean, do you believe he's sincere in what he says? Do you think he's posturing to an audience? What do you think?
A little bit of both.
What do you mean by that?
I would hope that he is sincere, but I think the president, it was an important clarification.
We had two sports that had religious issues in the news this week. One was in Texas and one was international. So a Texas association under legal threat capitulated to require that a basketball playoff game be moved from Shabbat so a Jewish day school could compete. And then in another, International Soccer Association is reviewing whether an Australian woman should be barred from playing for her national team because she wears a hijab, head covering, during games. What are your thoughts on each of these?
Well, first, as to the Texas Modern Orthodox Jewish Day School, I was so pleased that the Union of Reform Judaism was among the strong supporters of rethinking that Shabbat schedule and working that out so that this terrific team could compete.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree on this one, and I even said so in a meeting the other day, because the Jewish school knew months and months and months and months ago that, and they had just joined this association in 2010, and they were well aware that if there were playoff games that they would not have the opportunity to participate. So why they didn't address the issue before they got to this point rather than at the last minute, I thought was a little bit disturbing. Now, what about the hijab? What about that
That's
issue?
a little bit more complex, because if certain headdresses and so forth might encumber their athletic ability, that might be a little bit more problematical.
Some of the arguments have been that it could cause issues if it got lodged in somebody's throat with strangulation, or because there are a lot of headers. They've actually invented some really good Velcro fastened hijabs that allow them to stay secure when somebody heads a ball. So it may be that these so-called health issues may not be as significant. Yeah. What else you got? I see you have our upcoming Can We Talk?
And this is very important. David Makovsky, who is from St. Louis, who is a director with the Washington Institute on Near East Policy, is going to be speaking at the Can We Talk. And his topic is going to be Iran, implications for Israel, the Middle East, and the world. There's really nobody better in the industry, and not just because he's a hometown boy.
I think we were extremely fortunate to get David on such a timely basis to come in and talk about this when it's really a buzz all over. And many thanks to the JCC and JCRC, our partners, for cooperating with us in pulling this off in very short notice. And well, thank you. We'll be back with you in a couple weeks. So long.